Well, today, Florida lawmakers passed what opponents have called the Don't Say Gay bill. The measure would limit classroom lessons on sexual orientation and gender identity among young children.
Critics argue a provision allowing parents to sue school districts could have a chilling effect on those discussions, and that the bill's broad language could apply to all grade levels.
Grand Valley Schools emailed families on Monday regarding a Board of Education decision to act on, quote, a concern about the display of cards and stickers by some high school teachers to signal students could feel safe approaching them regarding personal LGBTQ questions.
The Ohio State House takes aim at discussions about race, gender, and sexuality in schools.
Members of the LGBTQ plus community say there is a wave of bills in the legislature that directly affect them.
In the first 3 months of 2022, NBC News reported that state lawmakers across the U.S. had passed nearly 240 bills affecting LGBTQ students, and how teachers are allowed to talk and teach about issues related to gender and sexual identity. Gender and sexual identity lies at the heart of the culture wars in education, and I can't think of any issue, maybe critical race theory, that is more contentious, more apt to generate strong and divergent opinions than this one. This is Ken Feudernick, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Courageous Conversations about our schools. Well, for today's episode of Courageous Conversations, we've got a small, diverse, and very opinionated group of educators, parents, one policymaker, and a recent high school graduate ready to share their opinions on all sides of this issue. But if we're successful, it won't be contentious. There'll be disagreements, but people won't be yelling at each other. As with all of our courageous conversations, we're going to see what happens when we turn down the volume, when people follow a few simple conversation agreements and really listen to one another. So let's meet our guests.
My name is Meg Kilgannon. I'm Senior Fellow for Education Studies at the Family Research Council. I'm a wife and a mother of 4 children from ages 17 to 23. And in 2015, our school board in Fairfax County, Virginia, decided to add sexual orientation and gender identity to the school's non-discrimination policy. And I thought at the time that that would be rather complicated to do. And so I've been thinking and studying about this ever since as a parent and as someone with a policy background.
My name is David Thomas. I live in Fort Myers, Florida. I'm originally from Western North Carolina. My background is I have over 22 years of experience in education. I started out as a teacher, taught PE and health, and then I have a master's in counseling. So I became a counselor, dean of students, and then I went back to school to UNC Chapel Hill to get my master's of school administration. I was an assistant principal, then I became a principal in North Carolina in 2013 of a pretty large middle and high school there. And I served at that school as principal for 7 years before moving to Florida in 2020. And then I took a step back and became an assistant principal in Southwest Florida for a year. And now I'm not currently in a school because my husband and I are in the process of adopting, and I will be a stay-at-home dad.
Hi. So Brenda Lebsack. I've been in public education since 1990. Before that, I worked in probation as a peace officer with juvenile hall. And in 2016 to 2020, I became a school board member in California in Orange County. So I've taught pretty much every grade. I've taught elementary school, primary and intermediate grades. And then I went into special education. I taught middle school, high school. I've taught in Las Vegas. I've taught in pretty much Northern California, Southern California. And right now I'm an adapted PE teacher for elementary schools. I teach in 7 schools in Santa Ana Unified School District, which is a Title I school district, about 98% Hispanics, a high immigrant population. And I have 2 kids, 1 grandchild, another one on the way, My husband is a Nazarene minister, and we have been in ministry together for over 30 years.
My name is Nora Lauder. I live in Russellville, Kentucky. I'm about an hour above Nashville, Tennessee. I'm a recent high school graduate. I'm attending Yale University next fall with plans to study American Studies and Education. And I am a co-leader of the Kentucky Student Voice Team, which is an organization that serves as research, policy, and advocacy partners to co-create more just and democratic schools in the state of Kentucky. I am also a queer student. I identify as queer, and I am not out to my parents yet.
My name is Joe Murray. I live in Oakland, Tennessee, right outside Memphis, but I'm originally from New Jersey, the great state of New Jersey. I came to education the long way. I was in law for 15 years. I worked for the American Family Association Center for Law and Policy in Tupelo, Mississippi. And in doing so, we always handled a lot of education type cases. And when I opened up my own practice in 2011, my focus was largely on education issues, student rights, teacher rights, and so forth. So in 2017, the stars all aligned, and I was able to actually follow my dream of going into education and retire from the law. And ever since that, I've been teaching 7th grade, and I've loved every minute of it. And I am also gay as well, and I've been married for 12 years now.
So now we're going to jump right in with two questions that are at the heart of our conversation today about sexual and gender identity in schools. And the first question I'd like you to respond to, each of you to respond to, is what role should schools play regarding policies, instruction, and classroom discussions related to sexual and gender identity? And Joe, I think I'll start with you and let you respond to that question, and then I'll go to each of the rest of you.
Thank you, Ken, for asking that question. What I would say is very little. And the reason I say that is because this is an issue that is very personal to both the student and the parent. There is a lot of emotion that comes in with what's going on here. And what I have told people in the past, if you have a Christian student who comes in and has parents who are atheists and wants to become Christian and be supported in their Christianity, I doubt the schools would be involved, obviously, for legal reasons. And I think that same standard should apply here, because for some, the issue of sexuality and gender identity is a religious issue. And you can't, the schools cannot take the place of the parental unit. I think that's part of the problem that we see in society today, is that the schools are trying to supplant the parental unit. The other issue that we have is that we, from my experience included, being gay today is not the same as it was in 1990, 1980, 1970, 1960. Now, is there a lot of work to do? Absolutely. Everybody should be treated equally. Everybody should be treated fairly. But we're kidding ourselves if we're saying that the people that are gay today are suffering the same type of consequences that were happening in the 50s and 60s. So I see it that in terms of rebellion, some kids are using such cultural aspects to rebel against parents. I go back to a simple thing. Kids are kids. We have to help them, we have to support them, but we cannot direct them on certain issues. These are young kids. They are still trying to determine who they are in the world. That is not going to be answered in middle school. I didn't know who fully I was, not just sexuality, but on a lot of things, till I got a little bit more mature. Some would say that I still need to get a little bit more mature to find that stuff out. But I think we're treating kids on issues of sexuality as if they are adults, and that is problematic. We support them, we help them, we guide them, but we're starting to cross a line. And that's what I'm seeing with so much that's coming out of the public schools.
So I'm going to come to you, Nora, and have you weigh in on this question that's right at the heart of the topic for today. What role should schools play when it comes to gender and sexual identity?
Well, I think when we have conversations about gender and sexuality, especially in relation to education, there is a very, very stark lack of students who are weighing in on these conversations and actually making policy decisions. And I know that we view kids as kids. We view kids as not being necessarily autonomous beings. But in my experience with student voice advocacy, student voice agency, and student voice power, students have a lot to say, and students are often they are seldom consulted on issues, especially related to topics like this. I think that we are starting to give students a bit more autonomy over their own issues and whether or not those issues are shared with parents. The relation that religion has with conversations about gender identity in classrooms. And I think ultimately conversation needs to include students. In my own experience, I do live in a very Southern Baptist community. And I have been around adults for a long time in my work with the Student Voice team, Student Voice National, all sorts of organizations. I speak to adults pretty regularly. Sometimes I do not feel heard. Actually, a majority of times I do not feel heard. I recently was at the National Board of Education with NASSP, the National Association of Secondary School Principals, on an NHS scholarship trip. I met with some officials there, some of the principals of the year, and had conversations about what schools should look like now. That was one of the very few opportunities where I've had to be in decision-making spaces. And I think that I represent a very small fraction of students. I think that all students, even those who are Christian-based, even those of different races and ethnicities, even those of different learning abilities and capabilities, all students need to be weighing in on these conversations. I think parents, they have a right to be concerned, but their autonomy can only exceed so far because students are ultimately the primary stakeholders of education. And so by listening to them and by valuing their voices, these issues will have much clearer connections if we actually involve students in discourse.
Thank you, Nora. I appreciate your response to the question. And Meg, I'm going to come to you now.
Well, thank you for the question. It's a very important question. I would say very small role in this regard. The question of someone's identity is, of course, an incredibly personal question, and it's something that's worked out over your entire life. It isn't something that is fixed in a particular age range or grade level. It's something that we are all forming as we live through our entire lives. And the major work that is done in childhood and in adolescence is incredibly important, but that work continues on into adulthood. And the role of schools should be to equip children to have the basis of knowledge to be comfortable considering ideas. I want a school system that helps children to love themselves, to love their neighbors, and to love their country, and to basically every child should be equipped to be the best person that they can possibly be at the end of their schooling, right? And to go into the world taking a love of learning with them. And that sounds pretty Pollyanna to hear out loud on a topic like this, but that is truly what I believe the goal should be. And the less focus we put on areas of disagreement, and the more focus we could put on areas that we do agree are important, or where there isn't a lot of controversy about the importance of a set of knowledge, say around mathematics or English language or language in general, et cetera, the typical traditional academic topics, I think would be a much healthier environment for children. And the information about sexuality and gender identity that schools are aiming at children, I would prefer that they aim that information at the parent, frankly, and equip parents to have these conversations with their children. And if there's a topic that you think parents need to be educated on, you can share the information with parents and then let them decide, because parents are the experts on their own children. And the role of the family is one that cannot be, if it is deficient in some way, there's just no public policy available to make up for those deficiencies, unfortunately, though we try as a society.
Great, thanks for that, Meg. And David, we're going to come to you last and have you respond to this question.
Well, I think that this question is very personal to me, and I'm very passionate about it. I live in Florida, so the don't say gay bill is the big thing down here with our governor. And so my answer to this is, I think schools, educators, and students, Nora, I think you're wiser beyond your years, just listening to you, but I think that they should play a more key role than our legislators and our politicians, because most of these legislators and politicians have never even stepped foot in a school or a classroom, and they don't have any education experience whatsoever. I have reached out actually to Governor DeSantis just to have a conversation. I've asked just to have a conversation with him, and I get no response because they don't listen. And coming from a very Southern Baptist background, we talk about the parents should be the the foundation of raising the kids. But when you come from Southern Baptist background and you've been told your whole life of being gay, you're going to hell. A lot of students who are gay, their first bullies are their parents. So these students don't have a safe space at home. So what we have to do as educators is somehow create a safe space for every student, regardless of sexual orientation, and culture as well. And I told my teachers time and time again when I was principal in North Carolina that if a student doesn't feel safe, a student will not learn.
So I'm going to pose the second question, and that is, how can schools respect the rights of parents while also ensuring that students are well supported and have a safe place to learn? And Brenda, I think I'll come to you. How do you balance the need, the obligation that teachers have that some of you refer to make sure students have a safe place to learn, while also respecting the rights of parents to know what's going on in schools with their kids?
I believe that parents are the number one safeguard in protecting children, and typically that is the case. And so to remove parents and to remove that safeguard is to put them in harm's way, because parents more than anyone else loves their children. Now, of course, there's exceptions to that rule, but as a special ed teacher now, we always give before an individual education program, we always tell the parents their rights and their safeguards. However, I'm finding that we're not doing that anymore. As far as when their rights get taken away, we're not letting parents know when their rights are taken away. And it's very arrogant on the side of the education system to think that we know best or we know better than their kids. We know better than their parents.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for your response. Nora, I'm going to come to you and have you weigh in on this question about the rights of parents and the obligations the schools might have, whatever they might be, to ensure that students have a safe place to learn.
Well, like I said earlier, Ken, I think that a lot of these conversations do end up being very parent-centric. In my experience, I am not out to my parents. I'm out to some of my teachers. When I have conversations with my teachers, I feel safer than when I have conversations with my parents. I also think of a friend of mine who lives in Marshall County, Kentucky, which is pretty far in the western part of the state, very rural. Paducah, Kentucky is having a pride parade. My friend is unable to go to that pride parade, or is considering not going, even though they are queer, because their church might be there. And their church is anti-gay, is also known to excommunicate people. So my friend would be at risk of bodily and mental harm. This information would also be shared with their parents against their will. I think that a lot of these conversations talk about parents being the primary safe space for students when they are not. And this is coming from a student. This is not coming from a concerned parent or a concerned citizen. This is coming from a student. Parents are not always the safe space. They're not. They're simply not the safe space all the time. I know so many queer kids who can't go home and be themselves. Do you know how hard that is when you can't go home and be safe around your parents? I think that if we started listening to queer students more often, listening to their voices, we would actually hear about the relationships that they have with their parents. And maybe parents aren't always the stakeholders that know everything that they know about their own kids. I can name tons of things that my mother doesn't know about me, or things that my father doesn't know. The students are autonomous beings. We have our own rights, we have our own agencies. We are able to be our own beings, especially queer students. We are coming to terms with ourselves as we do, and the education system needs to find a balance, a safe balance between respecting the rights of students and parents.
Nora, thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. Meg, we're going to come to you next and have you respond to the question about parent rights and the obligations of teachers and schools to make sure that kids have a safe place to learn.
I do believe that parents are the safeguard for children. I will acknowledge that there is a crisis in the family, and that it is the school system, the public school system, most profoundly that has to deal with that crisis. So I'm not by any stretch of the imagination implying that families are perfect, but I am saying that the best chance children have in life is if they come from a home with loving parents. And we need to understand that that is the ideal situation, that children have a good relationship with their parents and parents have a good relationship with their children. And any other experience is one that is not ideal. And again, this sounds like a trite and simple thing to say, but it is in its own way a very profound thing that is being lost by our culture, sadly. And I would also observe that, we had the Obergefell decision come down redefining marriage in 2015, and it's only 2022. And this is the implications of changing that decision, that definition of marriage that had been held previously as to be between a man and a woman exclusively, to now include between a man and a man or a woman and a woman. I mean, it is just not reasonable to think that discussions around the change of that definition are not going to be difficult. There isn't going to need to be a time for us to wrestle with the implications of that kind of decision in a place like a public school system, where we know that not everybody gets their way, right? We're coming together and we are accepting the fact that my views as a Catholic Christian are not going to be shared by everybody in the school system, nor promoted by that school system, but they must be honored and respected by that school system. And so to expect children to bear the brunt of adults grappling with these profound questions is very unfair. And that's a big problem with the culture war playing out in school systems, is ultimately it's the children who are going to suffer from our wrestling with these questions, right? So the children obviously are the most precious gifts that we have in our society, and they deserve a safe environment to be protected and to be allowed to form their identities with as little disturbance as possible, I would say.
Thank you for that, Meg. Joe, I'm going to come to you and have you respond to this question, which others have been responding to, about the balancing the rights of parents to know what's going on in school, to have their say, and the obligations of schools and teachers to make sure kids have a safe place to learn.
I think it's a great question. I think we have to remember that as teachers, we are public employees. We are not in place of the parents, we work for the parents. And look, parents have been making wrong decisions since the beginning of time. That's not an issue. That's not what we're saying here. What we're saying is, when do you get to override parental decisions? And giving that ability to state actors to kind of step in place and circumvent the will of the parents, even if society believes that is wrong. You cannot go in and attack that family unit that way. And I think what we see is, as much as I see, and I see so many brilliant young people, they're everywhere. And I mean, everybody tells me how brilliant they are, and I see it. but they are children. Okay, you know, Lord of the Flies, you know, it's a great book. I suggest we read it sometimes because children only can do so much, right? That's why we have laws that protect them from making decisions that might hurt them. So what I'm saying here, the safe space, that has always been interesting to me, because when I was in school for our National Honor Society, I wanted to sing Hallelujah, Hallelujah as a Catholic. That was a very personal song to me, and I thought it was a beautiful song. I was told I wasn't allowed to do it because that was religious. And nope, religion is not allowed anywhere near the public schools. Believe me, I've litigated First Amendment cases for 20 years. I understand the legalities of it, but let's just take the logic, not necessarily the law. You tell Christian students every single day that a huge part of who they are has to be checked at the schoolhouse door. Okay, you tell teachers who might want to put up a Christmas tree at Christmas time, you can't do that, but you can put up a pride flag. So what I'm saying here is that people are more than just one thing. So children are not all one thing, they're multiple things, and we should celebrate that. So just because a part of you might not be fully embraced and accepted, because there's a big difference between tolerance and acceptance. And I think that's lost in this debate. We can tolerate our differences, but I think what we're seeing here is we want full-blown acceptance. I get that as a gay man that is married 12 years, that will be having a family in the very near future, I might not be accepted by a portion of the population. Okay, that's fine. That's what we have to deal with when we live in a free society, right? We have to respect multiple views and multiple ideas, but we're not seeing that in the schools. It's very much a one-way road, which is you accept part of the LGBT plan or you are a cultural heretic.
Thank you, Joe. And David, will come to you last on this question.
I think that we should respect the parents' rights and decisions, and they do really have a voice in educating their children. Always tell the parents that they give us the best that they have, and that's exactly true. But when we talk about parental decisions, I'm asking which parents and which decisions, because we have to deal with more than just one parent or one set of parents. We deal with many parents who come from many different backgrounds. And I know that this is a very sensitive topic. Sex education is a very sensitive topic. And we're always going to disagree. Parents will disagree with teachers. Teachers will disagree with each other. But when Joe talked about, this is a one-way road, it always has been. And that one-way road has always been cisgendered straight people. And that's what we get resistance whenever we try to change the dialogue and the dialect, and we try to become part of a conversation to where we've been shunned our entire lives. And for us to be looked at and viewed as normal, we're talking about Christianity here, and Christianity is a choice. Homosexuality is not a choice. I'm a Christian. I'm a member of a church. I started the church. I just preached 2 weeks ago. I'm celebrated in my church. Me and my husband are, and it's a Christian church. And I hold very strongly to my faith, and nobody can take that away. But I've been gay. I'm not choosing to be gay. But one of the things we're talking about here is the safety of the child. And as a counselor as well, here in the state of Florida with this Don't Say Gay bill, schools can be sued, counselors can be sued if a student confides in a counselor that they're gay and this counselor does not tell the parents. So basically, educators are forced to out the students regardless of the safety of the student whenever they get home, because the parent can sue them. But it goes beyond, don't say, this is more of a political move to try to take control over public education, that the politicians will choose what's being taught and what's not being taught in the classroom, in schools, and the rest of us don't have a choice in the matter. So I'm very passionate about this. Yes, we do need to have a safe balance, but we need to have a conversation across the board. And right now, the loudest people are the ones who feel threatened by the fact that we are being brought finally as gay people to the table, and it makes people uncomfortable.
Thank you, David. Now we get to do something interesting and I hope productive, which is having listened to one another share each other's views about this topic. What questions or comments would you like to share? And just a reminder that it's important that we continue to be respectful and to ask questions that we're genuinely curious about. Meg, you had your hand up. You would like to offer a comment or pose a question.
Well, one thing that we haven't really touched on, but I think is worth people thinking about is the medicalization aspect of this issue. The medicalization of childhood, frankly, goes back to the controversies around ADHD drugs from when I was a kid up until now. The implications are very real for someone declaring an identity and socially maybe transitioning gender at school. That can lead to irreversible medical treatments that are sometimes given to children through social services administered in a school setting without the consent or knowledge of parents, because of this concept of the student's safety being in question. And we really have not explored this area of law and of the lived reality for these students adequately to have these sorts of programs in place, and this unquestioning attitude about students' declaration of their gender and the steps that they take to affirm that gender. These are incredibly important and consequential issues that really need to be discussed as a culture. I certainly have my views about it. I know that my views are not shared by everyone on this panel, but to just say that we're going to have gender affirming care, period, or children will kill themselves is not a healthy discussion of this issue. And it is not adequate to the moment that we find ourselves in.
I'm going to pose a question of my own. And Joe, I think it's directed at you, but others can respond. But your response to the question about what should schools do when it comes to gender and sexual, what should they be talking about? You said very little. And but I'm curious to know. I'm curious to know, as a gay man yourself that teaches middle school, would you feel comfortable putting up a picture of yourself and your husband on your desk or on your wall in your classroom? Or would you be comfortable having your husband come to school and join you in a, say, back to school night?
Let me dissect this a little bit. Yes, no, I do have a picture of me, my husband, and Wayne Newton is on my desk because, big Wayne Newton fan. And the thing is, I don't volunteer that information for kids. I do not have any pride memorabilia in my room. I do not have any political memorabilia in my room. I have pictures of presidents because I'm a social studies teacher, but I don't want my students to know all about my personal life. I am their teacher. I am not their BFF. I am not Dr. Phil. And that is what I think is the problem. I kind of laugh, and it's not a laugh because, my grandmother always said, if you're not laughing, you're crying. They're telling folks, oh, we can't arm teachers. We're asking teachers to do too much if we give teachers who want to be armed the ability to be armed in case there's a shooting. But yes, now these teachers have to deal with these issues of sexuality, which are completely sometimes over the pay grade of most, myself included. My background is law, so I don't know how to handle the mental health of a student who is questioning. That would be their parents, or that would be a doctor that they're going to. Now, my job is to be supportive. How do I be supportive? I'm an example. I'm not going on TikTok saying how proud I am to be a gay man and using my kids as agents of change in this horrible, horrible world we live in. That's the difference. That's the difference right there. You can be gay and in school, but you have to understand what your primary role as a teacher is. That's to educate. And what is the purpose of education? It is the creation of a citizenry that is engaged and skilled and understanding.
A quick follow-up. You teach social studies, don't you?
Yes.
So I assume that you talk about oppression of groups historically, and talk about slavery and racism as it is a historical events and facts. But there is a history of oppression and bullying against members of the LGBTQ community. And I'm wondering if you acknowledge that or talk about that in the context of social studies.
Well, it's not in my standards. I teach world history. My time ends in the 1700s. But the thing is this, you give me a group of people who have not been oppressed at some time during history, because my grandparents or my great-great-grandparents is Irish. They were oppressed very much by the English. Oppression is in the world, and that's what we should be going to stop, is oppression. And how we don't stop oppression is by keep dividing ourselves by identities and saying, okay, you're gay, so you have to have this life. You have to be this way, or we're only going to see the world through this identity. If this identity is threatened, then you are not in a safe space. We're not going to see the whole picture. When we see the whole picture, problems can be solved.
Thanks for the response to the question, Joe. David, you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, I do. First of all, I don't really expect straight people to really identify the things that we as gay people go through. Joe, I don't wave a rainbow flag everywhere I go either. And I don't expect other gay people to do that as well. But I want to be able to be comfortable. I want us to have conversations in the school systems to where I don't have to worry about, somebody coming up to me and telling me, you can't talk about being gay, you can't talk about your husband, because the majority of people in this school voted for Trump. And that's what I got last year when I moved here in Florida. I had a hard time putting a picture of me and my husband on my desk because of that. And the fact of the matter is, parents aren't equipped to deal with the mental health of kids most of the time. I can deal with the mental health of a child because I've been trained to. I have the degrees. I'm the professional behind it. But if a child comes to me and confides in me and about their gender identity, about being gay, and they're afraid to tell their parents, then I'm equipped to deal with that. But I'm also in danger of being sued at the same time because of these bills that are being passed.
The last part of today's conversation is going to be about your sharing your takeaways from what happened today. Brenda, let me just have you, if you would like to respond to what you take away from this conversation, what you've learned, and whether you think this was a useful thing to do.
It was very useful. I enjoyed hearing different people's perspectives, especially coming from different states, different, life experiences. And, I especially must admit, I really loved Joe's comments. And I think Meg brings up a really great point about the medical issue, because we're dealing with that in California, with wellness centers now being included in many of our schools, especially in the highest minority schools, such as the one I teach.
Nora, I see that you're ready to respond to the question about your takeaways and what you learned today. Please share them with us.
I wanted to thank everybody for this space. I really do appreciate intergenerational conversations like this, especially because I'm the student here. You guys haven't been students at a good amount of time, so it's truly between generations here, the conversations that we're having. And I appreciate being put in a space where I have to think critically about how people perceive my identity. And I am grateful that I have been given the chance to become emotional about something that others may not necessarily understand to the extent that I do, or may not agree to the extent that I do. And having the chance to hear these perspectives in real time and learn how to respond to them and learn how to lean into my emotions about my identity, I think is truly, truly valuable. And as much as my emotions did come through, so did a lot of reason in these conversations. And I think a lot of heart came out of these conversations. And I think that it's really important to continue having intergenerational conversations and truly listening to the students, even if they aren't saying things that you agree with or things that you understand. You have to listen to students. And I think that this is an excellent start for listening to students. So thank you all.
Thank you for that, Nora. Let me just come to a couple of you that haven't yet responded to your takeaways. Meg, how about you?
I really value these conversations in the advocacy that I've done over these last years since the non-discrimination policy came down in our high school. I found myself engaging with a lot of radical feminists early on this issue because we knew the difference between men and women. they as protecting the identity of women. And I never expected to become such great friends with those women. And these kind of conversations are very life enriching to consider someone else's opinion, particularly outside the views that you hold. And to really try to listen to what people are saying and respond with kindness and grace is a skill that we all need to practice, being especially. So it has really been a nice opportunity for me to get to do that here. And I have enjoyed especially everyone's comments, honestly. But Nora, I would wish you all the best next year at Yale. And as you start your college career, I'm thinking back on my own college experience and what a wonderful time that was. And I hope that it is equally enriching for you. And to everyone else, just the work that you're all doing in your individual spaces is incredibly important, and I'm very grateful for it. Especially you teachers who are engaging with students every day, or who have done that and are now retired from that. Your work is so important and so valuable. Thank you for what you do.
David, your thoughts on what you come away with from today's conversation?
Well, I think that, everybody was spot on when it comes to, it's great that we can just have productive conversations without cutting one another off. And yeah, we disagree on some of these major topics, but at least we're listening to one another. But ultimately, what it comes down to is the fact that, the safety of our kids and how we go about doing that, that's the utmost importance to us all. But our ideas on how to get there differ. And that's where, the conversations need to continue to happen. But I do think that we have a long way to go. And, that's where I come into play. I may not be a school principal now, but I will still be a champion for my kids. I still am a champion for my kids, the ones that I keep in contact with. Nora, like I said, I think you are wise beyond your years. I think you're going to go places in life, and I will continue to be a champion for you, even though I just met you. But I do think the conversations need to continue to happen, and we need to continue to learn from one another. And I will continue to champion for the LGBTQ+ community.
Joe, what do you come away with today?
I came away with hope. I think that there's always opportunity to find agreement, and that I'm going to leave you with two quick stories. One is there's the first law case I ever litigated, and I was very passionate. I was young. I was about 26, had more hair, less weight. And I thought my client was dead on right. And we went in there, and I was not willing to compromise, not willing to give an inch. The other side was just as stubborn as I was. And we were kept in a room for about 8 hours in different rooms as the judge was going back and forth. And finally, I swear he kind of beat us down, and we both left, and we were both miserable. And after the clients left, he pulled us back in, and he said, what is your take on this agreement? And we basically both said some things we probably can't repeat here. And he said, good, then my job was done. And I think that's what needs to be dealt with right here, is that we have to stop the all or nothing mentality. We have to stop that you have to accept me. You don't have to accept me. You can tolerate me, you treat me equally, but you don't have to accept me. And once we get over that hurdle, I think maybe we can go forward. And I will say this, the South sometimes gets a bad rap. I was able to, in my career, become the president of the Chamber of Commerce of my small little town, which was Southern Baptist. So I didn't know what was kind of be worse for me, being gay, Catholic, or a Yankee. in a small Mississippi town of about 5,000 people. But I found if you talk with people and you talk with them, not at them, and you don't challenge them and make them think that they're bad for their views, it's amazing what you can accomplish. So that's what I hope we've accomplished here today.
Well, now that I've had a chance to go back and listen to the conversation, here are some of my key takeaways. It's some combination of gratitude and hope mixed in with lots of curiosity and even a little frustration. I'll start with curiosity and frustration. Listening to people share their views raised so many questions for me, and there simply wasn't enough time to pursue many of them, nor was it necessarily my place as the host to ask them. But here are some of the questions I was really curious about. I wanted to ask those who said conversations about gender and sexual identity should stay out of the classroom, that they should be left exclusively to parents. I wanted them to respond to the concerns raised by Nora and David that some parents do not provide a safe place for gay or queer people to talk about these issues. As David said, for some kids who are gay, the first bullies they encounter are their parents. So if some kids don't feel safe at home, if they are profoundly anxious or fearful, and if, as David has observed, their ability to learn at school is compromised as a result of all that, what professional and moral obligations do educators have to support them, to ensure they do feel accepted, at least by others at school? And I recall Joe saying that teachers work for parents, but don't they also work for students? In this idea of acceptance, I really want to learn more about Joe's comment that schools should teach tolerance, but not acceptance. I think his point was that people should be free to accept or not accept others, including a person like himself who is gay. But why then shouldn't students be free not to tolerate others if, as Joe argues, they are free not to accept them? And given that there's been a long history of intolerance towards LGBTQ people, why not include that topic in classroom discussions or historical studies when learning about groups that have been or are currently being oppressed? I want to ask David how, as a principal, how as a practical matter, he navigated the tricky waters surrounding a student who didn't feel safe at home and doesn't want their parents to know about their sexual or gender identity. I have many more questions on my list, which is a source of some frustration for me. But this is why I have a sense of gratitude and hope. In just this short time with my guests listening and not interrupting, I feel as though we established enough trust that I could reach out to any of them to ask my questions and to keep the conversation going. And I think that's why these kinds of conversations are so important. Nothing during this call was settled. I'm not sure if anyone's mind was changed, but I suspect people learned something, maybe even felt something. But most importantly, people with very different perspectives on an emotionally charged and complicated topic were able to be in the same room. They heard one another, and I hope, felt that their humanity was respected. Okay, I'm guessing there are listeners out there who are pulling their hair out. I can't believe someone said such and such a thing that was so offensive to me, and it went unchallenged. Well, what I would say is that this is just what the beginning of a respectful and civil conversation sounds like. And if those of us here and listeners out there continue to talk and listen to one another, perhaps the conversation will continue and there will be a chance to challenge one another's views. What I do know is this: if we stay put in our own echo chambers, or if we shout at and shame one another, we will only become more entrenched in our views, and we won't solve problems like the one we discussed today. And that won't be good for schools, it won't be good for students, and it won't be good for our democracy.